Okay, this is Chapter 5, Part 4. We're continuing our discussion about the tensions leading to the American Revolution. Starting out, we're going to look at the Continental Congress. So, in an attempt to resist the Intolerable Acts, remember the Intolerable Acts are passed in 1774 as a result or a reaction to the Boston Tea Party. And it closed the port of Boston. It restricted the colony's authority, right? Their General Assembly is dismissed or dissolved. And then it allowed military commanders to lodge soldiers in private homes. There's approximately 3,000 troops sent to Boston after the Boston Tea Party to basically get matters under control and underhand. And so in response to this, the Continental Congress will form, and they will convene at the Philadelphia State House in 1774. 12 out of 13 colonies will be represented. Georgia did not send any representatives at this time. And this is going to be a group that will decide to adjourn in October of 1774 and agreed to go ahead and meet in May of 1775 if their demands were not met. So while they decide to meet in 1774, much of what they had to decide, or the grievances that they sent, letters of redress to Parliament and the King, much of what they had to discuss was just their issue of overtaxation, but also lack of representation in Parliament. The Suffolk Resolves are going to be resolutions in Massachusetts that called for resistance and preparation for war. So even within the colonists themselves, the colonial society, you start to see different spheres to develop. You had those who were loyal to the crown and to the empire. You had those who, were unhappy with what was happening, but they wanted to take a more peaceful and official and legal means to fixing the issues by sending, articles and petitions of redress. And then you had those who were like, there's never anything that's going to change. Like, we need to call it now, and we need to go ahead and go for revolution and independence. And so the Congress, what they're going to end up doing after these Suffolk Resolves are passed in Massachusetts specifically, Congress will adopt the Continental Association, which is going to call for an almost complete halt to trade with Great Britain in the West Indies. The one exception to this would be in South Carolina. The rice trade is going to be pretty profitable. So in South Carolina, the rice trade was pretty substantial to the colonial economy, and also in terms of like food sources and foodstuffs, it was pretty pivotal. So South Carolina did not want to cease or halt the rice trade with other parts of the Atlantic, and so it will be allowed to continue in terms of its trade negotiations and deals. But committees of safety are also going to be established in order to enforce the boycotts. This is going to represent a transition from colonial and British power to power in the hands of the people. And so this is going to be a change, right? The Continental Congress, not only do they draft, a position of redress to Parliament and the King, but they're also going to kind of take a united stance on boycotting British goods, right? To really put the hurt to the treasuries, and so that way they can maybe move forward, right? And so they'll adjourn in October of 1774, and they agree to meet in May of the upcoming year, May of 1775, if their demands are not met, and if things are progress or become even more volatile between the colonies and Great Britain. So by 1775, there's talk of liberty, like on an even grander scale. And this is going to be as a result of a deepening crisis. There's a deepening sense of divide between the colonies and Great Britain. Americans are going to increasingly base their claims not simply on the historical rights of Englishmen, but on the more abstract language of natural rights and universal freedom. So this has ties to Enlightenment principles that had really permeated Europe in the years leading up to this time. Two examples I can give you are that of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, and how their ideals and their actions and their writings are really going to embody this abstract language of natural rights and universal freedom. John Locke talked about the theory of natural rights as a justification for colonial resistance, and Thomas Jefferson, he held to his idea of equal and natural rights, but still pushed for loyalty in 1774. So despite, pushing for these rights of men and equality between the colonies and Great Britain, he still said that there needed to be loyalty to the crown in 1774. Now, this will definitely change as time goes on. He will definitely break from that viewpoint as time moves forward. I'll come back to that video in just a minute. Okay, so in April of 1775, so Continental Congress, they are still adjourned at this time, but in April of 1775, the war will break out at Lexington and Concord. This is known as the Shot Heard Around the World. In May of 1775, Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen will take Fort Ticonderoga in New York. So early on, these kind of skirmishes that are going to break out and begin the war, this is going to, really start to motivate those who thought, revolution and independence was, a feasible goal to obtain. People really start to talk about this and decide, maybe this is something we need to push for. So once Lexington and Concord takes place, the Continental Congress will reconvene in Philadelphia. And while they are essentially meeting again, other things are going to start taking place. So we have the battle at Fort Ticonderoga in May of 1775. The Battle of Bunker Hill, just outside of Boston, will be in June of 1775, and it's a British victory. However, General Howe will be forced out of Boston by March of 1776, so within the year. However, once the British are pushed out of Boston, they're going to push and set their sights on Brooklyn and New York as a port, and that will prove to be somewhat detrimental. General Howe will cut down the Liberty Tree in Boston in June of 1775, and these kind of tit-for-tat actions are really going to push the Second Continental Congress to be more decisive in their actions. So they do a couple of things simultaneously. They're going to raise an army, and they're going to appoint George Washington as its commander.
All right, at this time.
They're going to appoint George Washington as its commander. So the Continental Army will have a commander. Additionally, the Second Continental Congress in July of 1775 will draft and write the Olive Branch Petition. So they have a means to try to protect the colonists from the military of the British, but they're going to draft out an Olive Branch Petition. And in July of 1775, they pledge loyalty to Britain still, and they assert their rights as citizens. And by August of 1775, colonies will be formally declared in rebellion by the Crown and Parliament. So even though the Olive Branch Petition is like, look, we know this is happening. We want to keep this short. We want to be loyal. We want to make this right. Here are some grievances we have about representation and overtaxation. Here's what we can do to make this right. Will you work with us? And King George is, just outraged that the colonies are just not coming to heel, that they're not doing what they are told. And so not only publishing this Olive Branch Petition, but by raising the army and having George Washington being nominated as the commander, this is problematic, right? And King George is like, absolutely not. So once the Olive Branch Petition is refused, then the idea was that, okay, we're going to have to push for independence. If he's not going to listen to us, if we're not going to be able to make this work for us, we need to push for independence. Okay, so I've got some pictures to show you. So this is George Washington's military dress uniform. This is at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. You can see it here in this painting where he posed, but he wore this at formal occasions. Okay, there's also places and locations, like this is in Brooklyn in New York. This is Manhattan over here with the skyline. But there's a cemetery located here at the top of Brooklyn Heights up on the hill. There was a famous Revolutionary War battle here in Brooklyn in 1776. Thomas Paine is going to publish Common Sense in January of 1776, and it's going to criticize the monarchy and aristocracy. Now, Thomas Paine himself is really interesting because he is from England. He's a craftsman, but he immigrates to the colonies in 1774. And what's unique about his pamphlet is he tied economic hopes of a new nation to the idea of commercial freedom. And he also is going to expand the public sphere where political discussion took place. So not only are the ideas in his pamphlet considered radical for the time, it's also going to serve as kind of a founding ideology for economic freedom and, social freedom here in the United States, or what will become the United States. But because of his the popularity of Common Sense, as well as his influence on the Second Continental Congress, he is definitely going to be an influential factor, and his words, his writings, are going to be influential on the opinions of colonists across the colonies, and it will help lead to severing the ties between Great Britain and the American colonies. So I have I have one video I'm going to show you here in just a minute. It's from Schoolhouse Rock. And then if I have time, I'll show you the Too Late to Apologize video at the end of this part. So you have Common Sense by Thomas Paine. The Declaration of Independence is going to be something that the Continental Congress will work on pretty insistently. And the biggest thing that had to be addressed was that there had to be a unanimous decision made, that it couldn't just be half that said we're going to be independent and half not. They wanted to have a unified stance on becoming independent. And so there's going to be a lot of work put into this document. Now, Thomas Jefferson is known as the author of the Declaration of Independence. Much of his own ideas and writings are a part of that document. And it's going to declare the United States as an independent nation. And the preamble of the Declaration is really what gives a foundation for our government we have right now, even in 2020. And it's this idea that you cannot have a government function properly without the consent of its people, right? Consent of the governed. This was a new idea during this time in the 1770s. This was a radical notion of governance. There was not a government like it at the time. It was considered a great experiment. And a lot of people felt like, this push for independence is one thing, but will it last? Is it going to be successful? It's pretty risky. And so it's really going to push this idea of consent of the governed and equality and freedom as it meant in the 1770s. Equality and freedom in the 1770s, as it's, lined out in the Declaration of Independence, is not the same concept of equality and freedom that we have right now in 2020. All right, so that document, it's ever evolving and it's always changing. In July of 1776, on July 2nd in particular, Congress will formally declare the United States independent. They will get that vote, and then they're going to approve the Declaration of Independence 2 days later on July 4th, 1776. So formally speaking, we are going to be independent, or we cut our ties with Britain on July 2nd, but the document that declares it so will not be approved until July 4th, 1776. And there's roughly 27 to 28 grievances listed in the Declaration of Independence. So all of the issues that colonists had with quartering of soldiers and not being able to have weapons and not being able to practice their own religion or speak out freely without fear of reprisal. All of these things are going to be listed out as grievances in the Declaration of Independence, and then ultimately many of them will become the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution or the United States Bill of Rights. Okay, so I got a couple of videos I'm going to show you. The first one is from Schoolhouse Rock, and then the second one will be a scene from the show John Adams. Or actually, no, I'll show you the Apologize video, and then we'll start the next video with John Adams.
Rocking and a rolling, smishing and a splashing over the horizon, what can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hoped to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know, they built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray!" If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today. They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, "I don't care." He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, swishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country.
Halfway across the globe and we're standing on the ground. Screaming across the waves, you can't hear a sound. There's no fair trials, no train, no liberties, no tea. We've colonized America, we won't stand for tyranny. Okay, and it's too late to apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late. You've paid your foolish tax, read the acts, and they just won't do. apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late. Halfway across the globe and we're standing